Yeah, what a crazy day, guys. I mean, I'm just looking at the equity trade here, the charts in front of me on the Bloomberg. I mean, you had Fed Chair Jay Powell talk, maybe perhaps dialing back expectations in terms of rates, and you saw stocks sell off. And then you saw them, a bunch of buying into the close. We're at pretty much our highs of the day.
I think whatever expectations he sets or investors interpret from him have to be measured with a big grain of salt or taken with a big grain of salt, because there's so much data to come between now and the next time we hear from the Fed when it comes to rates. I mean, just this Friday, we're getting that payrolls report. What happens if it's stronger than expected or weaker than expected?
Let's not forget either that it's the final day of the month and the final day of the quarter as well. So you have all the indexes higher for the month, up at least 1.9%, and certainly higher for the quarter as well. 8.25% gain for the Dow Industrial. So maybe there's a little bit of, doubling down on your winners.
On the day here, of course, we're looking at green across the screen, a big difference in what we saw just about an hour ago when it looks like stocks are going to end the day pretty much in the red across the board. Yields are elevated. The VIX has flipped from gains to losses on the day, and even seeing a little bit of tempering in that bid that we saw into the dollar. We get the closing bells here in New York. It takes a while for these numbers to settle, but right now you're looking at a Dow Jones Industrial Average. It looks like it's going to close the day. We're just going to call it unchanged for right now. It's up about 10 to 20 points here, but those numbers still flipping around here. On the month, it will close higher by about 2.5%. A similar monthly gain for the NASDAQ and the S&P. On the day, though, the S&P up by 0.4%. The NASDAQ composite also up by about 0.4%. And your Russell 2000, a relative laggard on the day and on the month. It's higher on the day by about 0.3%, and on the month by just about 0.5 percentage point.
All right, so let's get to some of the individual gainers. Actually, we'll get to them in just a moment. What I did want to talk, it's a Monday. The S&P 500, Scarlett, you've got most names in the index actually higher today, about 308 to the upside, 194 to the downside, and 2 unchanged.
And because of the rally over the last hour, the final hour of trading, you see when you look at the IMAP, it's basically all green. The two sectors that are still in the red, materials down 0.6%. They had gotten a big lift last week because of China and all the stimulus measures that country announced. And consumer discretionary because of weakness in autos and cruise operators. But energy stocks, REITs, and communication services all gaining at least 0.75%.
All right, back to a Brett map. We have map because it's a lot of green there.
The Brett fall?
Yeah, what?
Brett fall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brat fall.
Brat fall. Brat summer. Yeah.
I don't know.
It was a Brat summer, now it's a Brat fall.
That's what I'm wondering.
Let's go with it.
Moving on to some of the individual
Scarlett.
gainers. Apple, it is among your top gainers in the NASDAQ 100. It's up about 2.25% here. Over the weekend, JP Morgan analyst Samik Chatterjee coming out writing that lead times for the latest iPhone suggested that slower initial demand for Pro models was starting to correct. Those were his words.
What is this? This is ridiculous. I ordered a phone a while ago, and this still hasn't been delivered. So if there's a slowdown, nobody said, shouldn't this thing have been at my doorstep already? Carol, can you actually do some on-the-ground reporting
I'll do
to
it.
get to the bottom of this?
What's interesting is I thought the Apple supply chain was usually spot on. You could track it from it coming from overseas.
I can. It left from some random city in China,
Maybe
and I don't know where it is.
Maybe it's just because
it's on
it's
like
you.
the slow boat from China.
What color?
Apparently.
Did you get like a weird color? Like
Barbie
purple?
pink.
Oh, Barbie
Yeah,
pink.
to match your blouse.
That makes me feel so good. All right, moving along to some of the individual gainers. CVS is another one, up about 2.5% here, just off its highs of the day. The company, we did see the stock jumping after a report that execs did meet with investor Glenview Capital Management on how it can improve operations amid a long drop in share value. So we do know Glenview founder has amassed a large position in CVS. The Journal came out with that over the weekend, citing unidentified people close to the matter. And so nonetheless, maybe we're waiting for something to come out of that meeting. So that stock was an outperformer. And then, I don't know.
If you care, Carol, it left Zhengzhou, China on 9/26 at 11:30 p.m. So
I always care.
the
I
viewers
always
need to
care.
know.
I mean, gosh, we want you to get your.
But there's
iPhone.
a strike at ports.
Oh, gosh. So I'm never getting this thing.
Maybe you might not.
Well, we better get here before midnight tonight.
See, you can track it, though. All right. In light of the VP debate,
Scarlett.
you're very.
Debbie Downer today.
In light of the VP debate, I wanted to take a look at the social media company that's majority owned by Donald Trump, because this was an outperformer. Finishing the day, we're talking about Trump Media and Technology Group, up about 9%. This is after a week where we saw some pressure, news noting that early investors sold shares at the end of the lockup. That was last week. And so the stock has had quite a run, guys, up almost 30% since September 23rd, still down about 76% from its high back in March, but nonetheless an outperformer in today's session. Tim?
Okay, you got the outperformers. I got the underperformers. I want to start with the auto industry and look at Stellantis, the parent company of Jeep, Ram, a bunch of other U.S. companies, Chrysler, and then some overseas companies, including Opel as well. Shares falling 13% today, the worst day going back to March of 2020. This after the company slashed its forecast for the year. It cited plans to lower production, spend more on promos and incentives, slowing in more competitive auto market. We saw shares of GM also fall by 3.5%, shares of Ford fall by more than 2%. Adjusted operating income is going to slump to 5.5 to 7% this year, down from a previous forecast for a double-digit percentage, according to the company. Saying that earlier today. I do want to move on and talk about shares of Carnival. It was down as much as 6.5% earlier in the session. They fell after the cruise line operator forecasted adjusted EBITDA for the fourth quarter just below consensus, only closed down 0.3%. The earnings report reflected a weaker outlook for net yields in the current quarter. We spoke to the CEO of the company, Josh Weinstein, a little earlier in our show, and he said demand is strong throughout every segment of their portfolio. It doesn't matter what brand, it doesn't matter what ship, they're seeing strength everywhere. So he's super optimistic.
And tickets at higher prices they were talking about for 2025.
Pricing power is there as well.
Who are these people?
Pretty remarkable.
I don't know.
He said they're seeing, I mean, this is what he comes on frequently with us, and he always talks about the value that customers see when it comes to cruising. And he's seeing no pullback, especially, there's a difference between when people are buying their tickets for these things and then what they're spending on the boats, ships, excuse me, not boats, ships. And the spend is really high on the ships too. So that's more of a real-time metric.
It's still a boat, Tim. But we just had Lizzie Dove from Goldman, and she made a good point too about the differential between what it costs to take a vacation on a cruise versus, say, just booking a flight and a hotel to somewhere else. And she says that it's still competitive in terms of cheaper, I should say, being on the cruise lines.
All right, well, there it is. I still have never taken one.
Yeah, neither.
It's the all you can eat.
No good segue.
One vegetable,
but Tim doesn't eat, so
I eat a lot.
Oh, he eats a lot.
No good segue to talking about some big merger news today. Ticker SATS, EchoStar. It's the parent company of Dish and Sling TV. DirecTV and Dish have agreed to combine in a deal that's going to create the biggest pay TV provider in the U.S. with about 18 million subscribers. Under the terms of the transaction, DirecTV is going to acquire Dish and Sling from EchoStar for $1 plus the assumption of $9.75 billion in debt. This is a merger decades in the making, finally.
Decades in the making. You see the share reaction there, though, too. Don't forget about that $5.1 billion in capital raise that seems to be hurting investors there. Meanwhile, in the yield space, we did see a big spike in yields across the board after those comments by Jay Powell. They ended the day, at least on the shorter end of the curve, up about 8 basis points, 5 basis points on your 5-year and about 4 on the 10-year. We should point out that overall, though, we continue to see that big increase in price and a big drop in yields in the month of September here. It'll be interesting to see whether that rolls over into October.
All right, guys, there's different ways to measure impacts on the economy. We found one that we thought was kind of interesting, and this has to do with menopause, costing the U.S. economy nearly $27 billion every year. We've actually done segments where individuals come on and talk about the impact on the workforce. And what's
I got to start coming to these meetings. I didn't know this is what we were talking about.
Your face gave it away.
I love when we could shock you and surprise you.
All right, well, I'll sit this one out because, clearly I know nothing about this.
No, it's really important. A new study taking a look at the impact that this is having.
Yeah, Carrot Fertility did this study. They got 70% of millennials who said they would consider shifting their work arrangements by reducing hours, moving to a part-time role from full-time, changing jobs, or retiring early to mitigate menopause symptoms. This is according to that recent survey from Carrot Fertility. As Carol mentioned, many different ways to look at different impacts on the economy, but I think what's unique here is that the millennial generation was the generation that really did work from home and the idea of hybrid work. So first generation sort of go through this with the understanding that maybe you don't have to be going to an office 5 days a week.
Well, this is a generation that really, is very beholden to the work-life balance. But again, as economists say, watch what they do, not what they say. Yeah. We'll see what happens when they actually get to that point, and it's something that they struggle with, and they want to keep their jobs. The other story that we're keeping an eye on is...
Are you sure Romaine doesn't want to add anything to this?
Romaine?
I got nothing, guys.
Okay. Maybe you have something to say about this.
I got nothing.
California's governor has signed a law that bans legacy preferences at the private universities in California. So we're talking about Stanford and USC. Starting next September, they will not be allowed to consider legacy in admitting students. This is now the second state in the country that's done this. Maryland has already adopted it, so you can't do this at Johns Hopkins, for instance. Other states have ban this practice at their public schools, but now California is saying if you're a private school, you can't do it either.
Can they still consider names on buildings? And if your name is on a building, you can go there?
How do they track this too? And is there a penalty if they let somebody in?
There was supposed to be a penalty. It's not clear whether under this law, this bill, the penalty went through. It would have been a financial penalty.
It's interesting.
I don't know. I don't know how you track it. Maybe
Right?
people tattle on each other. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think it's really interesting, but I think it's an important part of the conversation when it comes to universities and who gets in, why they get in, and I mean
How there are not enough spaces.
Yeah, Romaine is so quiet today. What is wrong with him? Did
He didn't get the new iPhone.
It was the menopause story that kind of shocked him.
He's waiting for the iPhone.
Sorry, what?
Now I know
When
what
does this show start? Have we started taping?
Now we know what to do to get him to be quiet. All right. Love you. Monday's over. All right, that's a wrap.
Wait, Carol, I actually do have a comment about menopause.
Do you?
No.
Okay.